Welcome back to my channel for a super short Leica episode. And in this episode, I want to compare the shutter noise coming from the Leica M11-P, which is this beauty here, the brand new Leica rangefinder camera, with the shutter noise coming from the Leica M11. And the background is that in my recent videos on the Leica M11-P, some people in the comments asked, is the shutter noise on the Leica M11-P more discreet than the one on the Leica M11, in the same way as we had it when we compared back then the Leica M10 with the Leica M10-P. Let's kick this off. Alright, so here we go. I will use for metering the noise coming from the shutter an app here on my iPhone 15 Pro Max, and you see if I become silent, noise goes down. If I start to talk again, noise goes up. And I will do a screen recording of everything that's going on so we can later compare them side by side, also with the charts and the meter here from the Leica M11-P shutter sound compared to the Leica M11 shutter sound. Alright, so the way I want to do this is, first of all, I have now installed here a lens. That's the 21mm Summilux lens, widest open is f1.4. And of course I will take measurements with a lens on the camera body and without a lens on the camera body. And I start with the Leica M11-P. And if I go here into the status screen and the menu, what I want to do is I want to go on single shot here. So let's go here to single shot, and I want to use the self timer here to get this done, and that is a separate menu entry now on the M11-P, and we find it here, self timer. I will go to 2 seconds, and then I show you how I will connect this with that metering app on my iPhone 15 Pro Max. I also want to go on exposure here to 1/1000 seconds, which is reasonably fast, and I will go now into the measurement for the Leica M11-P. Alright, so just to remind everyone, this is the Leica M11-P. I'm on self timer 2 seconds. I will take 5 points of measurement, and my iPhone is directly here in front of the lens, which is the natural situation because you will not shoot that camera without a lens, but I nevertheless want to also meter the decibel of the shutter without a lens mounted later on. So let's go for the first shot. Alright, second. Third. Pretty consistent, huh? Always 69. And that's it. Alright, we are done with the Leica M11 and the lens. Let's now unmount the lens, and let's do the same experiment without a lens mounted on the Leica M11-P camera body here. Doing the same without the lens and still the self timer. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. And number 5. Alright, and watch that the distance here, because here I have a hard stop for my smartphone. Watch that the distance is always the same, also when we go now to the Leica M11. This is now the Leica M11. I've set it again to 1/1000 seconds exposure time here, so pretty fast. You see the distance here is regulated by the hard stop. It's exactly the same as what we had before. I have the self timer on, so let's take 5 points of measurement here. Two more. And one more. Alright, that's it. I will now mount the lens on the Leica M11 and then repeat the same experiment, and then we look at the results, and then we will be smarter whether the shutter sound of the Leica M11-P is more discreet or not more discreet than the Leica M11 shutter sound. So here we go. The same Summilux M1-1.4 21mm is mounted. There is no gap between the smartphone and the lens, so this is exactly the same setup as what I had before on the Leica M11-P, and we go for the last 5 points of measurement here. All right, that's it. Let's now look into the results. Okay, so here are now the 5 data points I measured for the Leica M11P versus the Leica M11 with the lens mounted. And you see we talk here about 68.6 on average on the M11P versus 62.2 on average on the Leica M11, which means that the M11P is indeed a bit louder if the lens is mounted, this particular Summilux 21mm here, than the Leica M11, which is of course an interesting finding. Does it have any practical relevance? No, not at all. And I'm going to explain this in a moment later in the video. Here are now the 5 data points when the lens was not mounted on the camera bodies. And here we find now the opposite, but with a very small difference. We find that the Leica M11P with an average of 94.8 is a little bit quieter than the Leica M11 with an average value of 96.6. And I tried to explain this to myself, and when I played with the lens and the camera bodies, I found that although the Summilux 21mm sits firmly on both camera bodies, without any play by the way, I need nevertheless considerably more force to screw it onto the Leica M11 body than on the Leica M11P body. And that might explain why, if the lens is mounted, the M11 becomes a bit quieter, better sealed if you want to call it that way, whereas on the Leica M11P it is a bit quieter if you have no lens and just have the metering phone directly close to the shutter. Now I don't want people to get confused, because if you read in the web what a level of 70 decibel really means, that can already be quite disturbing and distracting. But here we are actually going for weighted decibel according to decibel A. Let me just go into here and let me zoom in a little bit so you can see this. You see here, this is dBA, and that's a special weighting scheme which basically reflects the way the human ear is hearing. And you see, if I normally talk here, it's always between 60 and 70 what in terms of dBA we get here. Now what I also want to show is, if I go back here, let me just quickly go back. So, and zoom in even a bit more. There's always a label here in this app which says what the noise level is about in terms of an equivalent level in a situation we know from our daily life. So if I'm completely silent, it says threshold of hearing. Look again. Here we go. Now if I take now the Leica M11P and I keep zoomed in here and go about 20 centimeter only away from the phone and the metering, watch what happens. I start silent and then you will see threshold of hearing. Quiet home. Did you see this? This is absolutely non-intrusive, is absolutely not disturbing. Have a look again. Quiet home. And let me quickly get the lens now mounted on the Leica M11 so we can do exactly the same with the Leica M11. And you will see this is exactly the same, which is a much more relevant pragmatic test of whether these cameras can be distinguished in terms of noise level or not. So let me start quiet again, and then let me release the shutter button of the Leica M11. Quiet home, you see? I'm about 20 centimeter away from the smartphone, which is measuring the noise level here. So this is exactly the same. So that means that the numbers I measured before, of course I was curious to get them, they don't really mean a lot. And whether you have in this table a 60 or 65 or an 80 or 85 is not really playing a role. And the app actually says for both cameras, the Leica M11 and the Leica M11-P, if you're even as close as 20 centimeter to the ear of a human being, it will still be like a quiet home. So there is really a super non-intrusive shutter mechanism built into both cameras. And in my opinion, but please chime in on the comments, there is not really a difference in terms of shutter noise here. And everything we saw in the numbers is quite comparable and does not really indicate that one or the other camera shutter is more discreet or more indiscreet or disturbing than the other one. Alright, that's it. That's all I wanted to show and test here. I was curious myself to find out if there is a difference when I saw these comments speculating whether the Leica M11-P, where my Summilux here is now mounted, has a more discreet shutter mechanism than the Leica M11. De facto, it's not distinguishable, and both cameras are very quiet, non-intrusive in terms of shutter noise. And if you actually are after a completely silent shutter, then you should go for electronic shutter. But on the flip side of the coin, you might get some rolling shutter effects if you use electronic shutter only. If you liked that video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel. There's always more to come. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and healthy. And of course, peace out.